My name is Kareem Al-Masri, and I have to tell you something that even now feels heavy on my tongue. I was once a man who hated Christians. Not just in passing, not just with quiet dislike, I carried in me a burning anger, a fire that pushed me to mock them, insult them, and even pray that their gatherings would be destroyed. I thought I was defending God, I thought I was standing tall for the honor of my faith. But what I did not know was that I was blind, walking in darkness, fighting a war that was never mine to fight. And then, one day, Jesus found me. I want you to picture me as I was in those days. A boy raised in a strict home where religion was not just a practice, it was the very air we breathed. The call to prayer woke me at dawn, the words of the Quran were etched into my memory before I could even write my own name properly. My father, a stern but respected man, used to place his hand on my shoulder and remind me, "Kareem, loyalty to your faith is loyalty to your blood." That phrase never left me. It shaped my heart, it gave me a reason to stand taller than my years. But it also planted seeds I didn't fully understand at the time. By the time I was a teenager, I already saw Christians not as neighbors or classmates, but as enemies. I didn't always call them that out loud, but deep inside, I carried contempt. If I walked past a church, I would feel anger boiling in my chest. If I saw them holding their Bibles, smiling as though they carried a treasure, I would mutter insults under my breath. I thought they were lost, cursed even, and I believed that despising them was equal to honoring God. That's how twisted my thinking was, and I had no idea how far it would take me. I remember the first time I ever stood in front of a group of Christians. It wasn't planned. I was walking home from school with a few friends when we passed by a group of young men and women gathered outside a house. They were singing soft, gentle songs I had never heard before. My friends laughed and called them foolish. I joined in, shouting words at them, mocking their songs, calling them weak. I remember the look on one of the young men's faces. He didn't shout back, he didn't curse me. He just smiled and lowered his eyes. That smile made me furious. I thought he was mocking me back, but I realize now it was something else entirely. You see, I built my pride on being the loudest voice against them. The more I mocked, the more I felt powerful. At family gatherings, when the elders spoke of how Christians were misguided, I would speak louder, eager to prove I was the boldest defender of our beliefs. Inside, I was a boy craving approval, a boy who thought that by hating others, I could earn respect. But in truth, I was a prisoner of my own anger. Night after night, I would lie awake on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I wondered why, even after all my loudness, I felt strangely empty. My family thought I was strong, my friends thought I was fearless, but in the silence of the night, my heart felt restless. I brushed it aside, telling myself that doubt was weakness, and weakness had no place in me. So I hardened my heart, and I prepared myself to push even harder against Christians, to shut out that quiet whisper I could not explain. This is the man I was before everything changed. This is the heart I need carried, angry, restless, proud, but secretly hollow. And I tell you this not to glorify who I was, but so you understand the depth of what happened next. Because when Jesus found me, he did not find a man searching for him. He did not find a man ready to surrender. He found a persecutor, a man blinded by pride and hate. And yet, he called my name. Before I share that moment, you need to understand who I truly was, and why my transformation still shakes me when I remember it. I was Kareem, the one who thought Christians deserved scorn, the one who laughed at their faith, the one who believed he was unshakable. That was my story, until the day Jesus entered it. I was born into a house where faith was not just something you practiced on certain days, it was the very air we breathed. My earliest memories are not of toys or games, but of voices rising in prayer before the sun had even touched the sky. The mornings in our home always began the same way. My father would clear his throat loudly, the sound echoing in the stillness, and that was the signal for everyone to rise. I would stumble out of bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes, while my mother gently but firmly pulled me toward the small mat spread on the floor. Even as a child, I knew there was no arguing with this rhythm. My father's voice would fill the room, deep and steady as he recited the verses he had known since he was a boy himself. I would try to follow, tripping over the words, my young tongue struggling to pronounce them as perfectly as he did. Sometimes he would stop and correct me, his hand resting firmly on my shoulder, reminding me that every word mattered. "Kareem," he would say, "God listens to every sound that leaves your lips." If you honor him with your voice, he will honor you in life. Those words carried weight, and I wanted nothing more than to make him proud. As I grew, the discipline deepened. I attended lessons at the mosque where the imam would test us on memorization. The older boys could recite entire chapters without blinking, and I burned with the desire to be like them. I remember sitting cross-legged on the cool floor, tracing the words with my finger, repeating them until my throat was dry. At times, I felt a strange pride swelling in me, not just because I was learning, but because I was becoming the son my father wanted me to be. Every verse I memorized felt like another stone in the wall of respect I was building in his eyes. But along with that respect came an unspoken pressure. In my household, mistakes were not easily forgotten. If I forgot a line, or if my attention wandered, my father's face would tighten. He would not shout, but his silence, his stern eyes, carried more weight than any slap could. It was as though every failure was a small shame on the family name. My mother, though gentler, would whisper warnings about how dishonor in the sight of God could follow a man like a shadow. That idea frightened me. I was only a child, but I began to believe that every action I took was being weighed on some eternal scale. Despite the weight of that fear, there was also warmth. My family was not cold. My mother loved us deeply, showing it in the meals she prepared and the way she smoothed my hair when she thought no one was watching. My father, though stern, believed he was shaping me into a man of honor. At night, he would sit with me and tell stories of our ancestors, men who never wavered in their devotion, men who stood proudly for the faith even when it cost them their lives. I listened with wide eyes, absorbing every detail, imagining myself one day being spoken of with that same pride. In the neighborhood, devotion was not just a private matter, it was public. People knew who prayed faithfully and who neglected their duties. Families were judged by the behavior of their sons. I quickly understood that my actions were never mine alone. If I faltered, it was not just Kareem who looked weak, it was the Al-Masri family. That understanding pressed on my chest like a weight I could never set down. So I straightened my back, sharpened my voice, and made sure that no one could accuse me of being careless in my faith. By the time I reached my teenage years, I had become known in the community for my zeal. I recited verses loudly, with a confidence that impressed the elders. At gatherings, I would ask questions, challenge anyone who seemed uncertain. It felt good to be noticed, to be praised as the boy who carries fire in his heart. My father beamed with pride, and that pride became my fuel. But somewhere beneath all of that, beneath the rituals and the memorization, I carried a quiet unease. There were moments, just moments, when I questioned whether my devotion was born out of love for God or fear of disappointing everyone around me. Those thoughts were fleeting, and I pushed them away quickly, almost angrily. Weakness, I told myself, was not allowed. And doubt was weakness. In my world, Christians were not just different, they were a threat to that honor. I learned this not through one lesson, but through many small messages repeated over the years. At family dinners, when the elders spoke of Christians, the tone was sharp. They called them misguided, corrupt, people who twisted the truth. At the mosque, the warnings were subtle but firm: do not be influenced by their lies, do not eat their bread, do not trust their smiles. I absorbed those warnings as if they were law, and soon I no longer saw Christians as neighbors or classmates, but as people who stood against everything my family had taught me to protect. I remember the first time I ever challenged a Christian boy at school. His name was Daniel. He was quiet, often reading during breaks, and one day I noticed the book in his hands. It was not our holy book. I pointed at it, loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You waste your time with lies," I sneered. The others laughed, and I felt a rush of pride. Daniel only looked at me, calm, with eyes that did not rise to my anger. I expected him to argue, to defend himself. He did not. Instead, he closed his book gently and walked away. I told myself I had won, but something about his silence unsettled me. Why didn't he fight back? Why didn't he look ashamed? That night, lying in bed, I replayed the moment in my mind. His calmness bothered me more than if he had shouted. It was as though he had something I didn't understand, something stronger than my words. I shook it off and convinced myself that his silence was weakness. But the thought stayed with me, buried deep where I could not quite reach it. Growing up in devotion meant more than just memorizing verses or standing in prayer. It meant carrying the weight of expectation, the pride of my father, the whispers of my mother, the watchful eyes of the community. It meant shaping every thought, every word, every action to fit a mold. It gave me strength, yes. It gave me identity. But it also gave me a heart that was trained to despise anything outside of that mold. I believed, with all my heart, that by opposing Christians, I was defending my family, my faith, my very blood. And so, I sharpened that belief like a blade, ready to cut down anyone who dared to stand against it. I did not yet know that this very blade would one day be turned against me, not by men, but by the truth I had spent so long running from. As I grew older, my devotion hardened into something sharper. What began as discipline in prayer and memorization soon began to shape how I saw the world beyond my own home. In my neighborhood, in the gatherings at the mosque, in the conversations whispered among uncles and older cousins, one theme returned again and again: Christians could not be trusted. They were called deceivers, people who had abandoned the truth and twisted it into lies. And because I wanted to be counted among the strong, I drank in those words without question. I can still hear the tone of the Imam on certain Fridays. His words would start calmly, guiding us through devotion, but sometimes his voice would rise, stern and unyielding, when he spoke of outsiders. Do not let their words enter your heart, he would warn. They smile, but their smiles are snares. They act humble, but it is a disguise. They will try to pull you from the path of God. Sitting cross-legged on the carpet, my hands resting on my knees, I would feel a chill run through me as he spoke. I would look around the room at the other boys, all nodding, their faces set with determination, and I knew I wanted to be among them, loyal, unshaken, ready to stand against anyone who opposed us. It wasn't just at the mosque. At home, too, the message was woven into our everyday life. My father would lower his voice whenever the topic of Christians came up, as if their very name carried a weight. He would tell us stories of men who had left the faith and joined them, and how their lives ended in disgrace. He spoke of how they tried to lure young men away, offering kindness that was nothing more than bait. My uncles added their own tales, stories passed from one generation to the next, always ending the same way, with a warning to guard our hearts and never let their lies take root. I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? These were the voices of the men I respected most, the people I trusted to show me the way. And so, with each story, my suspicion grew. It wasn't enough for me to simply avoid Christians, I began to look at them with disdain. If one walked past me in the street, I would feel my chest tighten with disgust. If I heard their greetings, softer and different than ours, I would mutter curses under my breath. I began to carry that contempt openly, as though it was a badge of honor. At school, Christians were few, but they were there. Their differences marked them immediately: different holidays, different ways of dressing, sometimes even carrying books that were not ours. I singled them out without even thinking. During breaks, I would find reasons to provoke them. I remember one afternoon sitting under the shade of a tree with a group of boys when a Christian student walked by carrying a small bag. I shouted at him, calling him weak, asking if he was running to his false prayers. The other boys laughed, and I felt a rush of pride in my chest. That moment, that laughter, it became fuel for me. Each time I mocked, each time I insulted, the approval of my peers made me feel like I was rising higher, becoming stronger. There were moments, though, that I still recall with unease. I remember a young girl in one of my classes. Her name was Miriam. She was quiet, often keeping to herself, but she was a Christian. Once, when she shared her notes with another student, I mocked her loudly, saying that her knowledge was worthless since she followed lies. She looked at me, not with anger, not with hatred, but with tears that she quickly wiped away before anyone else noticed. For a brief moment, guilt stirred in me, but I crushed it quickly. I told myself her tears were weak, nothing more. Yet even now, I remember her face. My pride in persecuting Christians grew beyond the walls of the school. At the youth group meetings in the mosque, older men would gather the younger ones, including me, and speak to us directly. They painted Christians as enemies of God, people who mocked him with their false beliefs. One man in particular, a mentor named Rashid, had a way of telling stories that stirred fire in us. He spoke of missionaries who came into villages, spreading lies, and how brave men stood up to chase them away. His voice would tremble with passion as he declared, "If you allow their lies to take root, you betray your family, your people, and God Himself." I hung on to his every word. Rashid had a presence that commanded respect. When he looked at me, nodding in approval after I made some bold remark about standing against Christians, I felt taller. He told me once, "Kareem, you have the heart of a lion. Do not let it grow soft." That sentence became like a seal on my heart. I wanted to be that lion. I wanted to be the defender of truth, the one who stood boldly while others hesitated. So I went further. When I saw Christian boys in the street, I would gather my friends and challenge them. Sometimes I mocked their prayers, sometimes I argued fiercely, twisting words to make them look foolish. Other times, I didn't need words, I would stand in their path, daring them to move, enjoying the fear in their eyes. Each time I did this, I felt as though I was proving something to myself, to my family, to God. But beneath that pride, late at night, a strange emptiness followed me. After all the shouting, after all the mocking, when I lay in my bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I would sometimes ask myself why the joy of victory faded so quickly. Why did the laughter of my friends echo in my ears only for a moment before silence swallowed me whole? I pushed those thoughts away, telling myself they were weaknesses. Yet, no matter how much I tried to bury them, the unease remained. Looking back, I realized those were the first cracks in the armor I had built around my heart. But at the time, I ignored them. I poured myself deeper into hatred, into mockery, into arguments, into anything that made me feel like a defender of the truth. I thought I was standing tall, but in truth, I was digging myself deeper into chains I could not see. That was the season of my life when the seeds of hatred took root. Seeds planted by elders, watered by mentors, fertilized by the approval of friends, and guarded by my own pride. I believed I was strong. I believed I was loyal. But I was blind, and those seeds would soon grow into something darker, something that would push me further than I ever thought I could go. The years that followed were the years when the seeds of hatred inside me blossomed into actions. It was no longer enough to hear warnings about Christians. It was no longer enough to whisper insults under my breath or sneer as they walked past. I wanted to act. I wanted to prove that my devotion was not just words but a weapon in the service of God. And in my blindness, I believed that hurting Christians meant honoring Him. At school, my reputation grew. I was no longer just the loud boy who mocked. I became the one others looked to when Christians dared to speak or even show themselves. If a Christian student opened his mouth in class to answer a question, I was quick to interrupt, calling him foolish, twisting his words until everyone laughed. I remember one day in particular. Daniel, the boy I had mocked before, stood up to give a short presentation. He spoke calmly, but I didn't hear his words. I was waiting for my chance. When he finished, I clapped slowly, mockingly, saying, "What wisdom can come from a boy who follows lies?" The class erupted in laughter. Daniel stood there, silent, his cheeks flushed, but his eyes steady. That steadiness irritated me more than anything. I wanted him to break, to cry, to curse me. But he didn't. I carried that fury into action. One afternoon, I saw Daniel sitting under a tree with a small book in his hand. I knew what it was. I could see the worn cover, the thin pages. A Bible. Without thinking, I stormed over, snatched it from his hands, and held it up. "Look at this garbage," I shouted, loud enough for others to gather around. My friends came quickly, eager to see. I flipped the pages, laughing, and then, in one swift motion, I tore a handful out and scattered them on the ground. Daniel jumped to his feet, reaching for it, but I shoved him back. "This is nothing," I declared, tearing more pages, my heart pounding with a twisted sense of victory. My friends cheered, clapping me on the back, calling me bold. Daniel stood there, his face pale, his lips trembling, but he said nothing. He bent down slowly, gathering the torn pages, treating them as though they were treasure. That image haunted me later, though I did not admit it at the time. It wasn't just at school. I sought out their gatherings. Sometimes they met quietly in homes, and word would spread through whispers. If I caught wind of it, I would gather a few others and we would disrupt them. We would bang on their doors, shout insults, call them traitors, and scatter before authorities arrived. The thrill of it gave me a rush I can hardly explain. My heart would race, my body buzzing with energy, as if I had accomplished something holy. I felt like a soldier, a warrior defending truth. The others began to call me Lionhearted, and that name became a crown I wore proudly. There were nights when I joined older boys to patrol the streets. If we saw Christians gathering late, we would confront them. Sometimes it was only words, sharp, cruel words meant to shame them. But other times, it became more. I remember chasing two young men down an alley, stones in our hands, shouting curses until they fled. They had been walking with Bibles tucked under their arms, and to me, that was reason enough. I told myself I was cleansing the streets of lies. On a few occasions, I even reported Christians to local authorities. I would whisper their names, say they were trying to spread their false beliefs, and step back as officials arrived to question them. I never saw what happened after, but I knew some of them disappeared from school, their families moving away quietly. Each time, I felt a surge of pride, as though I had struck a blow for God Himself. I thought I was defending my people, my family, my faith. But no matter how loud my voice grew, no matter how fierce my actions became, there was always the silence of the night. When the cheering of friends faded, when the rush of adrenaline left my body, I was left alone with myself. I would lie on my bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, my chest heavy. The faces of those I mocked, the tears of the girl Miriam, the steady eyes of Daniel, the trembling hands picking up torn pages, all of it would replay in my mind. And in those moments, the pride I carried by day felt like a hollow mask. I told myself that emptiness was a weakness. I reminded myself of Rashid's words, "You have the heart of a lion." I repeated them like a shield, forcing my chest to swell with pride again. Yet the unease remained. Why did their silence feel stronger than my shouting? Why did their calmness unsettle me more than their words? Why, after tearing their books and chasing them from gatherings, did I feel as though something inside me had been left torn as well? I never spoke of these feelings. To my family, I was the devoted son. To my peers, I was the bold defender. To my mentors, I was the rising lion. But in the quiet hours, when no one could see, I wrestled with a restlessness I could not name. It was as if a small crack had opened inside me, one I was determined to seal shut with more anger, more action, more persecution. I thought the answer was to go deeper, to prove myself louder, to strike harder. But what I did not realize was that no matter how much I fought, no matter how many Christians I mocked or threatened, I was not filling the emptiness, I was feeding it. And the more I fed it, the more it grew. That was my life then, by day, the persecutor, bold and unyielding, by night, the restless boy staring into darkness. I didn't know it yet, but even in those nights of emptiness, something was shifting. Even in my cruelty, even in my blindness, there was a hand reaching for me. But at the time, all I knew was that I was Kareem, the lion-hearted persecutor, the boy who thought he was God's soldier, even as his own heart betrayed him. I used to believe my heart was made of stone. I thought nothing could touch me, not the tears of Christians I mocked, not the prayers they whispered when I snatched their Bibles, not even the warnings of my own conscience. But little by little, cracks began to appear. They were small at first, almost invisible, but they were there, weak points in my armor that I could not explain away. One of the first cracks came in the form of forgiveness. I remember one particular Christian classmate whom I constantly mocked. I would laugh at him in front of everyone, calling him names, twisting his faith into a joke. Yet every time, instead of snapping back or even ignoring me with bitterness, he would smile. He would say, "God bless you," as if my insults could not stain him. At first, I despised that smile. It felt like a challenge, like a secret weapon he had that I could not take from him. But over time, I began to wonder, why doesn't he ever break? Why doesn't he ever hate me back? Another moment still burns in my memory. One evening, walking home, I passed by a small group of Christians gathered quietly in a house. Their voices carried through the window. They were singing, not with fear, not with shame, but with joy so real it almost felt contagious. I stopped in the street, hidden by the shadows, listening to words I did not fully understand. Their faces glowed in the dim light, their eyes lifted as though speaking to someone who was right there among them. And in that moment, a strange ache gripped me. I was the one who had power, the one who silenced them in public. Yet they were the ones with a joy I had never tasted. Then came the neighbor. She was an older Christian woman who lived a few doors away. I had mocked her once for carrying her Bible, even told others that she was brainwashed. But one morning, when my mother fell ill suddenly, it was the same neighbor who came to our door with a warm meal and herbs she had prepared. She never mentioned my cruelty. She never asked for anything in return. She simply smiled gently and said, "I will pray for your mother." I remember standing there, stunned, holding that food in my hands, feeling my pride melt just a little. Deep down, I thought, why would she care for us after how I treated her? But the most haunting moments came at night. In the silence of my room, when the world was asleep, I felt the hollowness inside me. During the day, I wore the mask of zeal, the pride of being God's defender. But when the lights went out, emptiness would crawl in like a shadow. I remember nights when I would dream of blood dripping from my hands, of faces I had mocked staring back at me, not with anger, but with sorrow. And sometimes, though I dared not tell anyone, I dreamed of a blinding light. In that light, I felt exposed, as if someone could see straight through me. Sometimes, I heard a voice, not loud, not harsh, but calm, almost like an invitation. A voice that said, "Why are you persecuting me?" I would wake up sweating, shaken to the core, but I told no one. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Yet the dreams returned, again and again. And each time, my inner conflict grew deeper. I began to ask questions silently. Why do Christians have peace while I feel restless? Why do they forgive when I attack? Why do they seem to know something I don't? I could no longer deny it, something inside me was breaking. I was not ready to admit it, not ready to let go of my pride, but I knew this much: the faith I thought was so strong was beginning to tremble. The cracks in my heart were widening, and though I tried to cover them with anger, the truth was already seeping in. Something was changing in me. Something I could not control. I remember the day so vividly. It was supposed to be another victory for me, another reminder that I was strong, zealous, and fearless in defending what I thought was the truth. I had heard that a group of Christians were gathering in a small hall near the market. I had already rehearsed in my mind what I would say and how I would embarrass them. I felt my chest swell with a strange pride, like a soldier preparing for war. To me, it wasn't just an argument, it was my duty. Every insult I threw at them was, in my eyes, a strike for God. I walked in with fire in my eyes. My words were sharp, laced with contempt. I mocked their prayers, scoffed at their songs, and laughed at the idea that Jesus could be anything more than a prophet. My voice was loud enough to silence the room. For a moment, I thought I had won. I could see some shifting uncomfortably, some faces turning pale. I felt powerful. But then, something happened that I never expected. Instead of responding with anger, one of them, an older man with kind, steady eyes, stood up. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he placed his hand gently over his heart, and with a trembling but unwavering voice, he said, "We will pray for you, my brother." His words hit me like a hammer. Pray for me, my brother. It was as though he hadn't even heard the venom I had spit out. I tried to laugh it off, to mock him further, but my throat felt tight. And before I could speak again, the whole room of Christians turned toward me. Together, they began to pray. I stood frozen, my fists clenched, my heart pounding. Their voices rose in unison, not with fear, not with hatred, but with love. They prayed that God would open my eyes. They prayed that He would bless me. They prayed that I would find peace. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt naked. Exposed. As if every wall I had built around my heart was being torn down brick by brick. I left that place in fury, slamming the door behind me. But the voices followed me. Their prayers echoed in my ears long after I walked away. I tried to drown them out with anger, telling myself they were foolish, weak, misguided. Yet deep inside, their love haunted me. That night, I tossed and turned in my bed. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, faces of peace, even as I mocked them. I replayed the moment when they prayed for me, over and over, like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. My mind screamed, why didn't they fight back? Why didn't they curse me? Why didn't they fear me? I paced the floor of my room, restless, confused, angry at myself for being shaken. I had always believed I was a defender of truth, a warrior for God. But for the first time, I felt small. Empty. I remembered the old man's words, "We will pray for you, my brother." That single word, brother, stabbed at me. They had called me family when I had treated them as enemies. For days, I carried that moment like a heavy stone on my chest. Every time I saw a Christian, I felt that same confusion rise again. Their smiles, their joy, their calmness in the face of threats, it all clashed with the hatred I carried. And at night, when the world was silent, I would lie awake, hearing their prayers in the darkness, fighting a battle inside me that I could not explain. What once gave me pride, my anger, my zeal, now left me restless and afraid. I couldn't admit it to anyone, not even myself, but I knew something had shifted. I was no longer the same. That night was unlike any other. I had carried my usual mask of boldness throughout the day, mocking, jeering, pretending to be strong, pretending to be in control. I laughed loudly in front of others, but when the silence of the night wrapped around me, the laughter inside of me faded. My room felt heavy, as though the walls themselves knew the emptiness in my soul. I lay awake on my bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, unable to close my eyes. My mind was restless, flooded with images I had tried so hard to bury. The faces of Christians I had mocked flashed before me. Their songs echoed in my ears. Their eyes, filled with unshakable peace, pierced through me even in memory. I turned on my side, hoping to escape the torment, but the silence only grew louder. Then it happened. At first, I thought it was a dream. A strange light appeared, not the faint glow of the moon slipping through the window, but something alive, something that pulsed with life. The room that had felt so small suddenly expanded, as though eternity had stepped inside. My chest tightened. I tried to move, but my body trembled violently, as though invisible chains held me down. The light grew brighter, filling every corner, erasing every shadow. And in the center of it stood a figure, majestic, radiant, unlike anything I had ever seen. His face shone with a love that terrified me and comforted me at the same time. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I knew. I didn't need anyone to introduce him. I didn't need to ask his name. My soul recognized him immediately. It was Jesus. My lips quivered. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak but could not. My heart pounded like a drum of war, yet my spirit bowed in surrender. Then he spoke. His voice was not like thunder, though it carried the weight of eternity. It was not like whispers, though it pierced through the marrow of my bones. It was both gentle and commanding, filled with a love so overwhelming I could hardly breathe. He called me by my name. My real name. Not the one I wore like armor among my peers, not the hardened identity I had crafted as a persecutor, but the name my mother whispered over me when I was a child. The name I had long tried to forget. Why are you persecuting me? The words shattered me. My knees buckled, and I fell from the bed onto the floor. Tears erupted from a place so deep inside me I didn't know it existed. I sobbed uncontrollably, my chest heaving, my hands clutching the ground as though I could hold myself together. Who are you, Lord? I whispered, though I already knew. I am Jesus, he said, his voice steady, his presence filling the air with a weight of holiness. The one you fight against. The one you mock in my people. The one you wound when you wound them. But I have come to you, not to destroy you, but to save you. My entire being shook. Images flashed before my eyes. The laughter as I tore apart Bibles, the threats I spat at Christians, the insults I hurled at those who never fought back. And suddenly, I realized the truth. I had not been mocking mere people. I had not been tearing mere pages. Every word, every act of cruelty, had been against him. Against the one who now stood before me, not with vengeance, but with open arms. I could not comprehend it. I had prepared myself for judgment, for wrath, for the consuming fire of his anger. But instead, I felt chains breaking, chains of hatred, chains of pride, chains of emptiness. One by one they fell, and in their place came waves of peace so pure I could barely endure it. Lord, I don't deserve this, I cried. I don't deserve your love. I have hated you. I have hated your people. My hands are stained with mockery, with cruelty, with sin. How can you come to me? His gaze did not falter. His light wrapped around me like a cloak, and his voice answered, You are mine. I chose you before you knew me. I loved you while you hated me. And I call you now, not because of what you have done, but because of what I have done for you. At that moment, I saw it. A vision within the vision. His hands, pierced. His side, wounded. His head, scarred by thorns. And yet his face, radiant with mercy. It struck me like lightning, he had suffered willingly. For me. For the persecutor. For the one who mocked him. I collapsed completely, my forehead pressed against the floor. The tears became rivers. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Forgive me, Jesus. Forgive me. I don't want this hatred anymore. I don't want this emptiness. Take my life. Take everything." And in that surrender, I felt it. Peace. Not a fleeting emotion, not a fragile feeling, but a flood of living water rushing through me. The weight of years lifted. The hollowness I had carried cracked open, and in its place bloomed something alive, hope. The room was still glowing. Jesus' presence remained. He knelt beside me. Not in distance, but in closeness, as if to say he was not far from the broken. His hand, radiant with light, rested on my shoulder. The trembling in my body ceased. The fear melted away. In its place was love, pure, indescribable love. "Follow me," he said softly. "And I will show you the life you were created for." The words settled into my soul like seeds. Seeds that would grow, seeds that would change everything. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know what the cost would be. But at that moment, none of it mattered. For the first time in my life, I knew what it meant to be alive. When the light finally began to fade, my room returned to its simple shape, the cracked ceiling, the bare walls. But I was not the same. I could not be the same. The encounter had carved eternity into my heart. The Jesus I had once mocked was now the Jesus I would live for. I stayed on the floor for hours, weeping, praying, whispering his name over and over again, as though I never wanted to stop tasting the sweetness of it. My lips, which once spoke venom against him, now could only say, "Jesus. Jesus. Jesus." And there, on that cold floor, I realized the truth that would define the rest of my life: I had been found. When I first encountered Jesus, my heart was overflowing with peace and love I had never known before. But the very next day, reality began to weigh heavily on me. I woke up with a strange mixture of joy and fear. Joy, because I felt free inside. Fear, because I knew my world would never accept what had just happened to me. I couldn't tell anyone, at least, not yet. So I lived a double life. By day, I walked among my people, pretending to still be the same man I had always been, hard, proud, and devoted to the way of my forefathers. But at night, when the streets grew quiet, I would lock myself in my room, trembling, and pull out the little Bible I had managed to obtain. Every page felt like fire in my hands, alive, burning into my soul. I read in whispers, mouthing the words silently in the dark, afraid that someone might hear the rustling of paper through the walls. I began to pray, but not like before. My old prayers were loud, memorized, recited with authority. These new prayers were whispered, halting, trembling words: "Jesus, if you are truly with me, keep me. Hide me. Teach me." My heart longed for him, but my mind was still tangled with fear. I remember one evening, my mother noticed something different in my eyes. She stopped me at the door and said, "Why do you look softer? Have you lost your strength?" Her words pierced me. She didn't know that her son was already changing inside. My father, too, seemed suspicious. He asked why I no longer spoke with the same zeal when others insulted Christians. I laughed it off, but deep inside, I was terrified. The hardest part was the loneliness. I could not share my joy with anyone. I longed to tell someone, anyone, about the light that had filled my heart. But who could I trust? My friends would have turned against me instantly. My family might have cast me out, or worse. So I carried the secret like a heavy stone in my chest. And yet, the more I tried to suppress it, the more it grew. Each night when I opened the Bible, the words seemed to leap from the page. "I will never leave you nor forsake you. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Love your enemies." Those words clung to me, followed me through the day, echoing in my mind while I pretended to be the same man I had once been. Eventually, whispers began to spread. Someone must have seen me lingering near the Christians. Maybe they noticed how my anger had cooled, how my voice softened when others cursed them. One day, a close friend confronted me directly. "Have you changed?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. My heart nearly stopped beating. I laughed it off, shook my head, and forced a smile, but I could see doubt growing in his eyes. Then came the storm I had been dreading. My family discovered a torn piece of paper from my Bible hidden among my clothes. My father's voice thundered through the house. My mother wept. My brothers and cousins shouted at me, their faces red with rage. They demanded answers. For a moment, I felt cornered, exposed, stripped bare. I wanted to deny it, to take it all back just to end the shouting. But something deep inside me whispered, "Stand firm." With shaking hands, I whispered, "Yes. I follow Jesus." The room erupted. The voices of those I loved most became knives. My father spat at my feet. My mother turned her face away as though I had died. One of my uncles slapped me across the face, shouting that I had betrayed my people, my blood, my faith. I felt my knees grow weak, but I stood there, tears streaming down my face, unable to stop. That night, I was cast out of my home. Alone, with nowhere to go, I wandered the streets until I found a quiet corner to sit and weep. My body shook with fear. My heart ached with grief. For the first time, I truly felt the cost of following Jesus. But even in that darkness, I felt him near. The memory of his voice in the vision returned to me, "Why are you persecuting me?" Now, I understood in a new way. Following him meant carrying his cross. And though the rejection of my family pierced me deeper than any blade, his presence gave me strength. The struggle of conversion was not just losing my home, my family, and my identity, it was the war inside me. Part of me wanted to run back, to pretend nothing had changed. Another part whispered, "But you have already tasted the truth. And truth, once tasted, cannot be forgotten." Every step I took away from my family's house that night felt like walking into exile. But deep inside, I knew, I was not truly alone. Jesus walked with me. And that was enough. I thought I had lost everything. My own family had turned their backs on me. My neighbors who once greeted me with respect now looked at me with suspicion. Whispers followed me in the marketplace. Some mocked me, others spat near my feet. I carried the weight of loneliness heavier than chains. Yet, in the middle of that emptiness, God was weaving something I could not yet see. It began with a whisper, a simple invitation. One evening, as I lingered at the edge of town, a man whose face I recognized but had never spoken to drew near. He looked me in the eyes without fear, something most avoided now. Quietly he said, "We gather tonight. If you want to come, you will be welcome." He didn't need to say more. My heart knew what he meant. I hesitated. My mind screamed, "What if it's a trap? What if others see you go? What if you're betrayed?" But a stronger voice within me urged, "Go. You prayed for a sign. This is the sign." That night, I walked through winding alleys, my heart racing at every corner. At last, I reached a small, dimly lit house. Before I could knock, the door opened as if they had been waiting for me. A woman smiled softly and whispered, "Peace to you. Come in." Inside, I found a handful of men and women seated on the floor. Their eyes turned toward me, not with suspicion but with warmth. They did not ask for proof of my faith. They did not interrogate me about my past. Instead, one of them rose, placed his hand gently on my shoulder, and said, "Brother, we have prayed for you. Welcome home." Those words pierced deeper than any sword. Brother. I had been called an enemy, a traitor, a disgrace. But here, in this tiny room, I was called brother. I fought to hold back tears. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt I belonged. We sang in whispers that night, voices trembling not with fear but with reverence. They read from the scriptures, words of hope, words of courage. As I listened, I realized these were the very words that had burned in my heart during sleepless nights. Now I was hearing them spoken in a circle of love. After the gathering, one of the elders asked me gently, "Have you been baptized?" I shook my head. Then, he said with a smile, "It is time you are reborn." A week later, before dawn, we walked to a hidden stream outside the village. The path was silent except for the sound of crickets and my own racing heartbeat. The sky was painted with faint stars, as though heaven itself leaned down to witness what was about to happen. I stepped into the cold water, trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight of what I was leaving behind. The elder raised his hands and said, "Do you renounce the darkness and confess Jesus as Lord?" My voice cracked, but I answered, "Yes, I do. Jesus is Lord." With those words, he lowered me into the water. For a brief moment, I felt buried with all my sins, my pride, my hatred, my past. And then I rose, gasping as the water dripped from my face. The morning sun broke through the horizon, its light striking across the water. In that moment, I felt free in a way I had never known. The others embraced me one by one. Some wept with joy. I wept too, not out of sorrow, but because I finally understood the meaning of new birth. The emptiness that had haunted me was gone. In its place was peace, deep, steady, unshakable peace. We shared a simple meal together afterward, bread and tea passed from hand to hand. It felt like a feast, not because of the food, but because of the fellowship. Each smile, each touch, each prayer whispered over me was a reminder, I was not alone anymore. That night, as I lay down to sleep, I whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me a new family." For the first time in a long time, I did not cry from pain. I cried from joy. And in my heart, I knew, even if the world rejected me, I had found a place where I was accepted forever. When I finally confessed with my lips that I belonged to Jesus, the world around me seemed to crack open. My own family, my blood, my roots, the people whose approval I had lived for, looked at me as if I had betrayed everything sacred. My father's eyes, once full of pride when I followed his ways, now burned with fury. My mother's voice, usually gentle, trembled with sorrow and disappointment. They could not understand how I, the son they raised to defend our faith with zeal, could now bow before the name of Jesus. The words they spoke cut deeper than any blade. "You are no longer our son," my father said, his voice cold, final, heavy like a stone. My mother wept openly, but there was no embrace, no comfort, only distance. My siblings avoided me, whispering behind closed doors, refusing to share meals with me. I became a stranger in my own home. The rejection did not stop at my doorstep. Neighbors, friends, men I once prayed with and fought beside, all turned their backs. Some spat at me in the streets. Others mocked me, calling me a traitor, a fool who abandoned truth. And then came the threats. Anonymous notes slipped under my door. Murmurs that I would be punished, that I would not live long if I continued down this path. There were nights when rocks crashed against my window. Once, I was shoved hard in the market, almost knocked to the ground, while men jeered, "Where is your Jesus now?" I will not lie, fear gripped me. My chest would tighten whenever footsteps followed me in the dark. Sleep often fled, replaced by nightmares of angry faces, torches, and violence. Yet in the midst of this storm, there was also a fire burning inside me that no one could extinguish. It was the memory of his voice, the memory of his eyes filled with love when he called me by name. That moment when Jesus found me had carved something eternal into my heart. I could not deny him, no matter the cost. There were small miracles that reminded me I was not alone. One night, when the threats grew so heavy that I thought I might collapse, I opened my Bible to the verse where Jesus said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." The words leapt off the page as though they were alive. My trembling stopped. Peace, unexplainable peace, wrapped around me like a blanket. Another time, when I had no food because my family refused to share with me, a stranger knocked at my door with a bag of bread and fruit. He said he felt a stirring in his heart to bring it. I wept that night, not from hunger but from the overwhelming realization that God himself was providing for me. Every loss, every tear, every sting of rejection became a testimony. Though I lost my father's approval, I gained the Father's embrace. Though I was cast out by my family, I was taken in by the family of God. Though threats surrounded me, there was a courage rising in me that I had never known before. The cost of following Jesus was high, but in those moments I learned something priceless: he is worth it all. When I look at my life now, I can hardly believe who I used to be. The very faith I once tried to silence has now become the fire burning inside my heart. I live with one mission: to be a witness for Jesus. My days are no longer about hiding in fear but about walking in courage, no matter what it costs me. I know the path is narrow and filled with trials, but I also know that Christ is with me every step of the way. That assurance has changed everything. At first, I didn't know how to share my story. The shame of who I had been haunted me. How could I speak of Jesus to others when I had once stood against him? But the Spirit within me kept whispering that my scars were not to be hidden, they were to be testimonies. Slowly, I began to share my journey. Not with anger toward Muslims or hatred for my family, but with love. I remembered the blindness I once lived in, and my heart ached for those who still walk in that darkness. Whenever I speak with Muslims, I speak with compassion. I tell them, I know your zeal. I know your devotion. I know your prayers, because I once prayed the same way. But I also know the emptiness. I know what it's like to feel that something is missing. And I have found the answer in Jesus. I share not to argue, but to open a door, to plant a seed, trusting that God Himself will water it. Sometimes I share my testimony in small gatherings. Other times, I share it through videos, speaking directly to anyone who will listen. Each time, I remind myself that it's not about me, it's about Christ. I often say, if Jesus could save me, the persecutor, then He can save anyone. Those words are not just a statement, they are my life. I am living proof that no one is too far gone, no heart too hardened, no soul too lost for His love to reach. Even now, my voice trembles when I remember that encounter with Jesus, the light, the love, the mercy I did not deserve. That moment fuels every word I speak today. It is the reason I can face threats, rejection, and loneliness. It is the reason I can endure. Because I know whom I have believed, and I will never turn back. Before I close, I always pray for those listening. If you are hearing my words now, I want to pray for you too. Lord Jesus, I ask you to open the eyes of every person watching or reading these words. I pray that the love you showed me, the mercy that rescued me, will touch their hearts as well. For the one who feels too far gone, remind them that you are near. For the one who is searching, reveal yourself to them in ways they cannot deny. And for those who are afraid to believe, give them courage. In your name, Amen. This is my mission now, to love, to serve, and to testify. My life no longer belongs to me, it belongs to the one who called me by name and gave me a new identity. And as long as I live, I will proclaim His goodness, so that others may find the same hope I have found in Him.